The Johnson family lived in a quiet, friendly neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name. Their small house was painted a warm yellow, with bright white curtains that fluttered in the gentle breeze. The garden was full of colorful flowers, carefully tended by Mrs. Johnson, who loved to spend her mornings watering and planting new seeds. The sun shone softly that afternoon, and birds sang happily from the tall trees lining the street. Marcus Johnson, the father, was a hard-working man. He had just finished a long day at the local factory and was looking forward to spending time with his wife and children. His face was calm, but his eyes showed the weariness of someone who worked hard to provide for his family. Mrs. Johnson, a kind and gentle woman, was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The smell of cooking filled the house, making everything feel warm and safe. Their two children, Emily and David, were playing in the living room. Emily, who was 10 years old, loved to draw pictures of animals and flowers. David, 7, was busy building towers with his colorful blocks. Both children laughed and played, their joy filling the room with light. The Johnson family was close. They had their small problems like any family, but they loved each other deeply. Marcus often told his children stories about hope and kindness. Mrs. Johnson reminded them that no matter what happened in the world, family was always the most important thing. That afternoon, everything seemed peaceful and normal. Suddenly, there was a knock on the front door. Marcus looked up from his chair and frowned slightly. He wasn't expecting anyone. Emily stopped drawing and looked toward the door, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. David paused his play and stood up, walking toward the hallway. Marcus stood, slowly, and walked to the door. Before he opened it, he peeked through the small window. 2 police officers stood on the porch. Their faces were serious, and their eyes did not show kindness. Marcus felt a strange feeling in his chest, a mix of worry and confusion. He opened the door and said, "Hello, officers. How can I help you?" One of the officers, a tall man with a stern voice, spoke. "We are here to ask you some questions about a nearby incident. We need to come inside." Marcus blinked, trying to understand. "An incident? I don't know anything about that." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Please step aside so we can come in." Mrs. Johnson appeared behind Marcus. She looked at the officers with calm but cautious eyes. "What kind of incident?" she asked, softly. The second officer, shorter and younger, said, "It's best if we talk inside." Marcus stepped aside reluctantly, and the officers entered the house. Emily and David watched from the hallway, feeling a little scared, but trusting their parents to keep them safe. The officers moved into the living room. They began asking questions about where Marcus was that day, if anyone had visited the house, if the family had seen anything unusual. Marcus answered as clearly as he could. Mrs. Johnson stayed close to her children, trying to comfort them. Minutes passed, but the officers seemed unsatisfied. They exchanged quick, quiet words with each other. Marcus felt the tension in the room grow heavier. Then, without warning, the officers asked the family to stand up. Marcus's heart beat faster. "What's happening?" he asked. "We need to take you all in for questioning," the tall officer said. His voice was firm, without any warmth. Emily's eyes widened in fear. "But we didn't do anything," she whispered. David clung to his mother's skirt. Mrs. Johnson looked at the officers, confusion and worry in her eyes. There must be some mistake. But the officers did not listen. They began to handcuff Marcus and Mrs. Johnson, then called for others to help with the children. The neighbors started to gather outside, watching in silence. The Johnson family was shocked and scared. They couldn't understand why this was happening to them. They had always lived honestly and peacefully. Marcus wanted to explain, to tell the officers that they were wrong, but no one gave him a chance. As they were led out of their home, Emily looked back at the little yellow house, their safe place, and tears filled her eyes. David squeezed his mother's hand tightly, trying not to cry. Neighbors whispered among themselves. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Inside the police car, the family sat quietly. The children clung to their parents, trying to hold on to hope. Marcus stared out the window, heart heavy with confusion and sadness. Mrs. Johnson wiped a tear away, but kept a calm face for the children. The family didn't know what would happen next. But in that moment, everything they had known to be safe and certain felt broken. The officers' rushed decision, based on a wrong assumption, had turned the Johnson family's peaceful day into a nightmare. The police station was cold and quiet, very different from the warm yellow house the Johnson family had just left behind. The walls were plain, and the bright fluorescent lights made everything feel harsh and unwelcoming. Marcus, Mrs. Johnson, Emily, and David were led inside, still handcuffed and confused. Marcus's heart felt heavy as he looked around the room. He could see other people waiting, some looking tired, others worried. But none of those faces were familiar, and none could offer comfort. His thoughts rushed. Why was this happening? What mistake had been made? Mrs. Johnson held Emily's hand tightly, trying to be strong for her children. Emily looked up at her mother, eyes wide with fear, her small fingers trembling. David stayed, close to Marcus, whispering softly, "Dad, why are we here? What did we do?" Marcus swallowed hard. He didn't have an answer. All he wanted was to protect his family. An officer called their names one by one, and they were taken to separate rooms for questioning. Marcus sat alone in a small, bare room with a metal chair and a desk. The door closed behind him with a sharp click. He was alone except for a single officer who asked questions from time to time. Marcus answered calmly, explaining that they had been home all afternoon. He told the officer about his job at the factory, about his wife's work as a nurse, and about their children playing quietly at home. But the officer's eyes were cold and did not seem to believe him. Meanwhile, in another room, Mrs. Johnson sat with Emily and David. The children clung to their mother, their small bodies shaking with fear. Mrs. Johnson tried to comfort them, whispering gentle words, telling them this would soon be over. But even she felt unsure. Emily wiped her tears with the sleeve of her shirt. She didn't understand why police officers had come to their house and why they had been taken away. All she wanted was to go home, to be safe and warm again. David looked around the room, noticing the harsh lights and the cold floor. He missed his toys, his bed, and the smell of his mother's cooking. He didn't understand what was happening, but knew he wanted to be with his family again. Back in the waiting area, the officers talked quietly among themselves. Some faces looked serious, others looked uneasy. The lead officer, the tall man who had come to their house, seemed troubled. He kept looking at his phone and whispering to his partner. Hours passed slowly. The Johnson family waited, tired and scared. Marcus kept thinking about their neighbors, wondering what they thought of all this. Did they believe the officers? Did they think the Johnsons had done something wrong? The family's lawyer finally arrived. She was a kind woman named Ms. Carter, who had worked with the Johnsons before. She immediately asked to see each family member. When she saw them, her face softened with concern. She promised them she would do everything she could to prove their innocence. She talked to the officers, asking for evidence and explaining the family's story clearly and calmly. But the officers said they had to follow orders until the investigation was complete. As Ms. Carter left to gather more information, Marcus thought about his children. He wanted to tell them to be brave, but he felt scared himself. He thought about his own father, who had told him to always stand tall no matter what life threw at him. Suddenly, a young officer came to Marcus's room. He looked nervous and uncomfortable. "Sir," he said quietly, "we received new information about the incident. It looks like there was a mistake." Marcus's heart jumped. "What kind of mistake?" he asked. The officer hesitated. "The people we were looking for were seen a few blocks away, not at your house." Marcus closed his eyes, relief and frustration mixing inside him. "Then why did you arrest us?" The officer didn't answer. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson sat with Emily and David, telling them stories about brave heroes and kind hearts. She wanted them to believe that even in hard times, good things could happen. Emily listened, but her small face still looked worried. David asked softly, "Mom, will we go home soon?" Mrs. Johnson smiled gently. "Yes, baby. Soon we will all go home." Back in the main office, the lead officer stared at the new report on his phone. He rubbed his forehead and sighed deeply. For the first time, he wondered if his quick decision had been wrong. He thought about the Johnson family, the parents who had been calm, the children who looked scared but not dangerous. He thought about his own family and how he would feel if this had happened to them. The officer's partner noticed his change in mood and asked, "Is something wrong?" He shook his head, but kept looking at the screen. "I think we need to fix this, quickly." As the day turned into evening, the mood in the police station shifted. The officers began to prepare the paperwork to release the Johnson family. Marcus and Mrs. Johnson were brought together again, and the children were allowed to sit with their parents. Emily hugged her mother tightly, whispering, "I want to go home." David leaned against Marcus's chest, his small hands holding tight. Marcus looked at his family and promised himself he would never let anything like this break them apart. Ms. Carter returned with good news. "The report shows the Johnson family was not involved," she said. "You will be released soon." The family felt a small spark of hope, but the day's events had already left a mark on their hearts. They had been hurt by a mistake, one made too quickly, without care or thought. And even though justice was coming, the pain of fear and confusion stayed. As the officers came to unlock their handcuffs, Marcus looked around the room one last time. He thought about the world outside, where their yellow house waited, full of flowers and memories. He knew things would never be exactly the same. The spark of fear had turned into a fire of hope, a hope that someday things would be better, fairer, kinder. And for the Johnson family, that hope was enough to keep them strong. The Johnson family sat quietly in the waiting room of the police station. The harsh lights and cold walls made it hard to feel calm. Marcus kept looking at his watch, waiting for the moment when they would finally be free. Mrs. Johnson held Emily and David close, her arms wrapped around them like a shield. But inside, she was worried. She had never felt so helpless before. Emily's small hands trembled as she held her mother's. "Mom," she whispered, "why did they think we did something bad? We didn't do anything wrong." Mrs. Johnson smiled gently, trying to be brave for her children. "Sometimes people make mistakes," she said softly. "But we will be home soon, and everything will be okay." David looked up at his father with wide eyes. "Dad, will they keep us here forever?" Marcus shook his head. "No, son. We're going home soon. I promise." But even as Marcus spoke, he felt a knot of worry deep inside. The officers were still looking through papers, asking questions, and talking in low voices. The family didn't understand what was happening. They only knew that the longer they waited, the harder it was to feel safe. Outside the station, the sun was setting. The sky changed from blue to soft pink and orange, but inside, time seemed to stand still. Emily thought about her bedroom, the cozy bed with the soft blanket her mother had sewn. David thought about his toys and the small train set he loved. They both wished to be there now, away from the strange noises and cold floors. Marcus looked at his wife and children. He wanted to protect them, to take away all their fear. But all he could do was hold their hands and hope for the best. A police officer returned with a folder full of papers. He handed it to the lead officer, who read quickly. Marcus noticed the officer's eyes flicker with something. Was it doubt? Confusion? Regret? The lead officer called another officer over and spoke quietly. Marcus could hear bits of their conversation. Mistake. Wrong address. Wrong family. His heart jumped. Maybe they would be free soon. But then the officer looked at Marcus and said, "We need to check a few more things before we release you." Marcus wanted to argue, to say that everything they needed was already clear, but he knew it wouldn't help. The officers were following rules, and the rules sometimes felt unfair. Emily's eyes filled with tears again. "Mom, please, I want to go home." Mrs. Johnson hugged her tightly. "I know, baby. We're almost there." Time passed slowly. The Johnson family sat in the cold room, waiting for a decision. The silence was heavy, broken only by quiet whispers and the occasional footsteps of officers passing by. Marcus tried to keep his mind busy. He thought about his childhood, about how his father taught him to be patient and strong. He thought about his wife's smile and their children's laughter. Those memories were like small lights in the darkness. Suddenly, the door opened and a woman stepped inside. She was Ms. Carter, their lawyer. Her face was calm but serious. She sat down next to Marcus and spoke softly. "I have good news," she said. "The new information clears your family. You will be released soon." Marcus's chest felt tight, relief mixed with exhaustion. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Mrs." Johnson smiled for the first time that day, but there was still sadness in her eyes. "It's been so hard," she whispered. Ms. Carter nodded. "I know, but we will make sure this never happens again." The family waited as the officers prepared the paperwork. Finally, the handcuffs were removed. Marcus stood slowly, feeling stiff from sitting so long. The family walked out of the police station together. The fresh air hit their faces, and for a moment, they all just breathed deeply. Emily and David looked around, amazed to be outside again. Their neighbors had come to the station, waiting to welcome them home. Some brought flowers, others offered kind words. The Johnson family felt a wave of warmth and support that helped heal the day's pain. As they drove back to their yellow house, Marcus held his family close. He looked at the smiling faces in the rearview mirror and promised himself that he would do everything to keep them safe. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, the family talked quietly. They shared their feelings, their fears, and their hopes. They knew things had changed. Some things would never be the same. But they also knew that together, they could face anything. Emily looked at her parents and said, "I want to be brave, like you." Marcus smiled and squeezed her hand. "You are brave, Emily. You always have been." And with that, the Johnson family began to heal, one small step at a time. The day after their release, the Johnson family woke up to a quiet morning. The sun peeked through the curtains of their yellow house, casting warm light over the living room where Emily and David played quietly. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, deep in thought. Mrs. Johnson was preparing breakfast, but moved slowly, her mind still heavy with the events of the past day. Although they were back home, a feeling of unease stayed in the air. The nightmare of being wrongly arrested had left its mark on every member of the family. The house still smelled like cinnamon and coffee, but it no longer felt completely safe. Marcus thought about the officers who had come to their door, the cold looks, the hurried decisions. He wondered what had caused the mistake. Was it just bad luck? Or something deeper, something unfair? Suddenly the phone rang, breaking the silence. Mrs. Johnson answered carefully. "Hello?" It was Ms. Carter, their lawyer. Her voice was calm but urgent. "I have some news about your case. The police department wants to meet with you." Marcus frowned. Why? We've already been released. There's more, Ms. Carter said. They want to talk about what happened and how they plan to fix this. Mrs. Johnson exchanged a look with Marcus. When is the meeting? Tomorrow morning, Ms. Carter replied. It's important that you all come. That night, the Johnson family talked quietly about the meeting. The children listened, not fully understanding, but sensing that something serious was happening. Marcus reassured them, promising he would protect them no matter what. The next morning, the family dressed carefully and drove to the police station. This time, the mood was different. The officers greeted them with respectful nods instead of cold stares. The lead officer, the one who had arrested them, stood waiting. Marcus's heart pounded as he stepped inside the meeting room. The walls were still bare, but the atmosphere was softer. The officer looked tired and a little ashamed. Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson, the officer began, I want to apologize for what happened. We made a mistake. You and your family were arrested without reason, and that should never have happened. Marcus listened quietly, not sure what to say. We have reviewed the case carefully, the officer continued. It seems that we acted too quickly, based on wrong information and assumptions. I want you to know that we are starting new training programs to prevent this from happening again. Mrs. Johnson's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled softly. Thank you for saying that. It's important that this never happens to another family. Emily held her mother's hand tightly, and David sat close to Marcus. The family felt a small sense of relief, but the pain of the experience was still there. The lead officer took a deep breath and added, I realize now how much this affected your family. We want to offer support, and we're ready to work with you and the community to rebuild trust. Marcus looked at the officer. For the first time, he saw a real human being behind the badge. He saw someone willing to learn and change. We appreciate that, Marcus said slowly, but it will take time. Trust is not easy to rebuild. The meeting ended with promises and plans. The police officers said they would meet with neighborhood groups and work on fairness and respect. Ms. Carter thanked the officers and told the Johnson family she would continue to support them. As they left the station, Marcus felt a mixture of emotions, hope, sadness, and determination. The road ahead was long, but at least now the conversation had started. Back at home, the family gathered in the living room. Marcus put his arm around Mrs. Johnson and looked at his children. We're going to be okay, he said gently. This was a hard day, but we will keep moving forward. Emily smiled shyly and said, Maybe one day police officers will really understand us. David nodded. And no one will be scared anymore. Mrs. Johnson kissed her children on the forehead. We will make sure of that. That evening, the family sat together, sharing stories and dreams. They talked about a future where fairness and kindness could grow. They talked about hope, and in that hope, the Johnson family found strength. Days passed, but the weight of what had happened to the Johnson family did not lift easily. Though they were back home, a quiet sadness stayed with them, like a shadow in the corners of their hearts. Marcus sat in the living room late one night, staring out the window at the dark street. The peaceful neighborhood looked the same, but he felt different. The image of officers entering his home, the fear in his children's eyes played again and again in his mind. Mrs. Johnson was in the kitchen, washing dishes silently. Her hands trembled slightly as she cleaned, but she kept her face calm for the children. She knew she had to be strong, but inside, she felt a deep ache. Emily sat on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. She looked smaller somehow, quieter than usual. David played with his blocks on the floor but didn't build anything new. Both children seemed to carry a heaviness that words could not explain. That night, the family gathered for dinner. The food was warm, but the atmosphere was heavy and quiet. Marcus reached out and took Mrs. Johnson's hand across the table. She squeezed it back, grateful for his presence. "Do you think it will ever be the same?" Emily asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at his daughter and smiled gently. "I don't know, Emily. But I do know that we will get through this. Together." Mrs. Johnson nodded. "We have each other. And that is the most important thing." Still, the questions lingered. The family wondered how something like this could happen to them. How could people think they were guilty without knowing the truth? Why did it take so long for the police to believe them? Marcus wanted answers, but he also feared what those answers might reveal. One evening, Marcus and Mrs. Johnson sat alone after the children had gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. "I keep thinking about their faces," Marcus said quietly. "The officers who arrested us, did they ever stop to think about what they were doing?" Mrs. Johnson sighed. "Maybe some did, but others didn't. It's not just about one family, it's about how people see us, and sometimes those views are unfair." Marcus nodded. "It hurts. It feels like we are judged before we are even known." Mrs. Johnson reached for his hand. "I know, but we have to keep hoping that people can change." That night, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the future for Emily and David. He wanted them to grow up in a world where they were seen for who they really were, not judged by their skin color. The next morning, Marcus woke up feeling tired but determined. He went outside to the garden where Mrs. Johnson was planting new flowers. The bright colors were a small sign of hope in the quiet morning. Emily and David joined them, helping to water the plants. Their small smiles warmed Marcus's heart, reminding him that even after pain, there could be new beginnings. As days turned into weeks, the family tried to return to their normal life. Marcus went back to work, and Mrs. Johnson continued her job as a nurse. Emily and David went back to school, but the experience had changed them. Emily found it hard to concentrate. Sometimes she would look out the classroom window, thinking about the police station and the cold rooms where they had waited. She missed the safety of their home, and sometimes she felt afraid to talk about what had happened. David was quieter than usual. He didn't talk much about the day they were taken. Instead, he held his mother's hand tightly and asked lots of questions about why people sometimes treated others unfairly. Mrs. Johnson spent many evenings talking with her children, answering their questions as honestly as she could. She told them that even though bad things sometimes happened, love and kindness could help heal the hurt. One afternoon, Marcus met with Ms. Carter, their lawyer. She told him that the police department had begun to change some of their rules and had started training programs to prevent mistakes like theirs. "That's good," Marcus said. "But it feels like it's only the beginning. There's still so much work to do." Ms. Carter nodded. "Yes, but your family's story has helped many people understand why change is needed. You are making a difference." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Maybe their pain could become a light for others. Still, there were moments when the sadness returned. One evening, Marcus found Emily crying quietly in her room. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Emily wiped her tears. "I just feel scared sometimes. What if it happens again?" Marcus hugged her close. "I promise. We will do everything to keep you safe. And remember, you are never alone." That night, Marcus sat by the window again, looking at the stars. He thought about the hard days behind them and the uncertain days ahead. But he knew one thing for sure. The love in his family was stronger than any fear. Mrs. Johnson joined him, and they stood together in silence, holding hands. "We have been through so much," she said softly, "but we will heal, and we will make sure our children grow up in a better world." Marcus nodded, feeling the quiet strength that came from hope. The road was long and the wounds were deep, but the Johnson family had each other, and that was enough to keep moving forward. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of the Johnson family's home. The yellow house stood bright and welcoming, but inside, the family was still healing from the recent storm that had shaken their world. Though the past weeks had been difficult, today felt different, like a fresh start. Marcus stood outside in the garden, watching Emily and David play near the flower beds. The children laughed freely, their worries momentarily forgotten as they chased butterflies and collected colorful petals. Marcus smiled, feeling a quiet peace. This was the family he loved, the family he had fought to protect. Mrs. Johnson stepped outside, carrying a tray of fresh lemonade and cookies. "Time for a break," she called with a warm smile. The children ran toward her, eager for the treat. Marcus joined them, and for a moment the house was filled with light, laughter, and the simple joy of being together. That afternoon, Marcus and Mrs. Johnson sat down with Ms. Carter, their lawyer. She had good news. "The police department has agreed to hold a community meeting," Ms. Carter explained. "They want to hear from families like yours and work on building better relationships with the neighborhood." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like a good step." Mrs. Johnson smiled. "It's important that our voices are heard." The community meeting was set for the following weekend, and the Johnson family prepared together. Emily practiced, speaking in front of the mirror, her small voice growing stronger with each try. David helped by making colorful posters with messages about kindness and understanding. On the day of the meeting, the neighborhood gathered in the local community center. Families, neighbors, and police officers filled the room, some faces familiar, others new. The mood was hopeful but cautious. Marcus stepped up to speak first. He looked out at the crowd, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he began. "Our family went through a very hard time. We were wrongly arrested and it scared us all. But we believe this is a chance to make things better, not just for us, but for everyone." The room was silent, listening. Mrs. Johnson continued, "We want a community where everyone feels safe and respected, where children don't have to be afraid, and families can live without fear." Emily stood beside her parents and spoke next. Her voice was soft but clear. "I want to say that we are all the same inside. We all want to be loved and safe." David held up one of his posters. "We should help each other, not judge." The police officers listened carefully, some nodding thoughtfully. The lead officer who had arrested the family stood nearby, his face serious but open. After the speeches, people shared their stories. Some spoke about their own fears and hopes. Others talked about how the police and community could work together better. The meeting ended with promises to hold regular gatherings, listen more, and build trust. The Johnson family felt a new sense of purpose. They were not just survivors. They were leaders for change. Back at home, the family celebrated quietly. They knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but they also knew they could face those challenges together. That night, Marcus tucked Emily and David into bed. Emily smiled up at him. "Dad, I'm proud of us." David yawned and whispered, "I feel safe now." Marcus kissed their foreheads. "And I will do everything to keep you safe always." Mrs. Johnson joined them, and the family shared a quiet moment, wrapped in love and hope. The next morning, Marcus received a call from his workplace. His manager wanted to meet and discuss a new opportunity, a chance for Marcus to lead a safety and diversity program at the factory. Marcus felt surprised but hopeful. "This could be a chance to make a difference," he told Mrs. Johnson. She nodded. "You've already shown strength. This is just another step." As Marcus prepared for his new role, he thought about the family's journey. They had faced fear, pain, and injustice, but they had also found courage, love, and hope. The yellow house felt brighter than ever before, a symbol of new beginnings. One afternoon, Marcus stood in front of a group of workers sharing his story. He spoke about fairness, respect, and the importance of understanding each other. His words touched many hearts. People listened, asked questions, and promised to be better. Emily and David watched from the side, proud of their father. As the sun set, Marcus looked out at the world, feeling a deep sense of peace. The past could not be changed, but the future was still theirs to shape. Together, the Johnson family had started a new chapter, one filled with hope, healing, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The days turned into weeks, and the Johnson family felt the slow but steady healing begin. Life was no longer the same as before the arrest, but it was better, a little brighter, a little stronger. They had faced fear, confusion, and pain together, and now they looked forward to a future built on hope. Marcus sat at the kitchen table one morning reading a letter. It was from the police chief, thanking the family for their courage and promising continued efforts to improve the community. Marcus smiled quietly. This was more than just words. It was a beginning. Mrs. Johnson brought him a cup of tea. "It feels good to see change happening, doesn't it?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, but it's the small things, too. The way neighbors say hello now, the kindness in the school, the smiles on Emily's face." Emily and David had started to come back to their old selves. Emily was eager to draw pictures again, filling her pages with colorful scenes of family and friendship. David played outside with new friends, laughing more easily. One afternoon, Marcus took Emily and David to the park. The sun was warm, and the trees whispered gently in the breeze. Emily pointed to a butterfly, and David tried to catch it, his laughter filling the air. Mrs. Johnson watched from a nearby bench, her heart full. "Look at them," she said softly. "They're healing." Marcus smiled. "So are we." That evening, the family sat together around the dinner table, sharing stories from their day. The conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and warmth. It was a feeling Marcus had missed, a feeling of safety and joy. After dinner, Marcus sat with his wife while the children played. "Do you remember how scared they were?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Johnson nodded. "Yes, but I also remember how strong they were, and how strong we all are." Marcus reached for her hand. "We've come so far." Mrs. Johnson smiled. "And we will go even further." The next day, Marcus visited the local school to speak with teachers and students about respect and understanding. He shared his family's story, not to dwell on the pain, but to inspire hope and change. The teachers thanked him, and the students listened with wide eyes. Emily and David sat nearby, proud of their father. Later, Marcus met with community leaders to plan new programs focused on fairness and trust between police and residents. These programs would help others avoid the pain the Johnson family had experienced. One afternoon, Marcus returned home to find a surprise waiting. Emily and David had made a colorful mural on the wall of the living room, a bright scene of hands holding together, children playing, and hearts shining. Mrs. Johnson smiled as she looked at the mural. "It's beautiful." Emily beamed. "It shows how we are all connected," David added, "and how we can be kind." Marcus hugged them both tightly. "This is the future we want." Days later, the Johnson family was invited to speak at a city event celebrating community unity. Standing on the stage, Marcus looked out at the crowd, neighbors, police officers, leaders, and friends. He spoke with quiet strength. "Our family was hurt by mistakes, but we chose to believe in hope. We chose to work together, and together we can build a better world." The crowd applauded, and Marcus felt a deep sense of pride, not just for himself, but for his entire family. That night, as the family gathered in their living room, Marcus thought about how far they had come. The yellow house, once shadowed by fear, now glowed with love and promise. Mrs. Johnson kissed her children good night and smiled at Marcus. "We have a lot to be thankful for," Marcus nodded, "and even more to work for." The Johnson family knew their journey was not over. There would still be challenges, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, their community, and a future full of hope. As they settled into sleep, the house was filled with peace. Outside, the stars twinkled gently, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, light would always return. And so, the story of the Johnson family ended not with pain, but with healing, love, and the courage to build a better tomorrow.